In the opulent Hotel Royal, a bride lies dead in a locked suite, her veil torn, cyanide on her lips. Was it the grieving groom, consumed by hidden guilt, the jealous rival, her heart poisoned by lost love, or the nervous cousin, hiding secrets in the shadows? Hercule Poirot unravels a web of lies, from a moonlit garden quarrel to a cunning duplicate key, to unveil a killer driven by envy. In 30 seconds, a mystery unfolds. Can you solve it before the truth strikes? Chapter 1. The Sealed Chamber. The Hotel Royal stood as a monument to elegance, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers gleaming under the soft glow of a summer evening. The air thrummed with the anticipation of a grand occasion, the wedding of Miss Eleanor Langston to Mr. Charles Haverford, a union that promised to blend beauty, wealth, and impeccable lineage. Guests in tailored suits and silken gowns drifted through the lobby, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. Yet, as Hercule Poirot stepped from the polished lift onto the 5th floor, a discordant note pierced the festive harmony. A maid's scream, sharp and chilling, echoed from the end of the corridor. Poirot, his moustache immaculate and his patent leather shoes catching the light, hastened toward the sound, his companion Captain Hastings at his heels. "Good Lord, Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed, his face flushed with alarm. "What's happened?" "Patience, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice calm but his green eyes alert. "The truth, it announces itself in such cries." They reached the bridal suite, its heavy oak door ajar. A young maid, her cap askew, stood trembling outside, her hands clasped as if in prayer. She's dead, sir," she stammered, pointing within. "Miss Langston, the bride, she's gone." Poirot entered the suite, his movements precise, like a cat navigating a delicate perch. The room was a vision of opulence. Ivory silk draped the walls, a crystal vase held roses in full bloom, and a gilded mirror reflected the scene with merciless clarity. On a velvet chaise longue lay Eleanor Langston, her wedding gown a cascade of white satin untouched by stain or wrinkle. Her face, once radiant, was now still, her lips parted as if in mid-breath. A veil of fine lace, its edge cruelly torn, trailed across her lap like a fallen petal. The air carried a faint, bitter scent. Almonds, perhaps, though no nut dish was in sight. Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, gasped. "Great Scott! Poirot! She's murdered, isn't she? But how?" The door was locked. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering over the veil without touching it. "Regardez, Hastings, the tear in the veil, it is not accidental. It is deliberate, a gesture of intent." He rose, his gaze sweeping the room. The key rested in the lock, its brass gleaming. The windows, framed in heavy brocade curtains, were bolted shut, their latches undisturbed. A champagne flute, half full, stood on a mahogany table, its bubbles long since faded. "Impossible," Hastings muttered, running a hand through his hair. "No one could have entered or left. The key's still here, and the windows are sealed. Could it be suicide?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his disdain for hasty conclusions. "Non, mon ami. The suicide, it does not tear its own veil in such a manner. This is murder, and the locked room is but a puzzle to be solved." He turned to the maid, who lingered in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Mademoiselle, who has access to this room?" "Only Miss Langston, sir," she replied, her voice quaking. "She took the key yesterday when she arrived. No one else except, well, the master key. But that's with the manager." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning. "And you found her when?" "Just now, sir, at 9:30. I knocked, but there was no answer. I thought she was dressing for the ceremony, but I used my key and found her like this." "Merci," Poirot said, dismissing her gently. He paced the room, his small frame commanding the space. The locked door, the sealed windows, the key in place. Yet a woman is dead, and her veil is torn. This is no ordinary crime, Hastings. It is statement, a performance. Hastings frowned, his honest face creased with confusion. A performance? But who would do this? And why? On her wedding day? Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "That, mon ami, is what the little grey cells must uncover. We shall speak to the groom, the guests, the staff. Somewhere, in their words or their silences, lies the truth of this sealed chamber." As they left the suite, the hotel's festive chatter seemed distant, overshadowed by the spectre of death. Poirot paused, glancing back at the door. "The heart, Hastings," he murmured. "It locks tighter than any door. And it is there we shall find our murderer." Chapter 2. The Grieving Groom. The drawing-room of the Hotel Royal was a study in restrained grandeur, its walls adorned with gold-flecked wallpaper, and its windows draped in heavy velvet that muted the morning sun. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, though it did little to warm the chill that had settled over the gathering. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the opulence around him. His hands rested lightly on his lap, fingers steepled, and his green eyes, sharp as cut glass, surveyed the room's occupants with an intensity that belied his calm demeanour. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense, his honest face etched with unease as he glanced at the man before them. Charles Haverford, the groom who would never now be a husband. Charles sat on a brocade sofa, his once pristine morning suit now creased, as if it had absorbed the weight of his grief. His dark hair, usually so carefully groomed, fell in disarray across his forehead, and his hands, strong, capable hands that had likely clasped Eleanor Langston's in moments of tenderness, trembled as they clutched a crumpled handkerchief. At 32, he was a man of considerable charm, his features handsome in a classical way, with a square jaw and deep-set eyes that now held a haunted shadow. Yet there was something in his posture, a slight rigidity, that caught Poirot's attention. Grief, yes, but was there more beneath the surface? "Monsieur Haverford," Poirot began, his voice soft yet precise, each word chosen with the care of a jeweller setting a stone. "My deepest sympathies for your loss. Mademoiselle Langston was, I understand, a woman of great beauty and promise. To lose her on this day of all days, it is a tragedy most profound." Charles's head jerked up, his eyes meeting Poirot's for a fleeting moment before dropping to the floor. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. I can scarcely believe it. Eleanor was everything to me. We were to build a life together, to travel, to—" His words faltered, and he pressed the handkerchief to his lips, as if to stifle a sob. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "It is precisely because of this tragedy, monsieur, that we must speak plainly. The death of Mademoiselle Langston was no accident. She was poisoned, and the circumstances, the locked room, the torn veil, suggest a mind both cunning and deliberate. You will permit me to ask, when did you last see your fiancée?" Charles swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Last night, at the rehearsal dinner in the hotel's ballroom. It was a splendid affair, Eleanor was radiant, laughing, dancing with the guests. She wore a sapphire gown that matched her eyes. A faint smile touched his lips, then vanished. I left her at 10 o'clock. She said she wanted to retire early, to rest for the ceremony. I kissed her good night at the foot of the stairs and went to my own room on the 3rd floor. And this morning, Poirot pressed, his tone gentle but insistent, like a tide lapping at a shore. I woke at 7, Charles replied, his voice steadier now, as if recounting facts anchored him. I dressed, had breakfast in the dining room with some of the guests. My cousin Lionel was there, and a few others. At 9, I went to the bridal suite to check on Eleanor. I knocked, but there was no answer. I assumed she was with her maids, preparing. I didn't want to intrude, so I returned to the lobby to greet arriving guests. It wasn't until the maids' scream. He trailed off, his hands clenching the handkerchief until his knuckles whitened. Hastings, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. "Good heavens, man! You must be devastated. To think someone could do this to her, locked in her own room. Did she have enemies? Anyone who might have wished her harm?" Charles's eyes flickered, a momentary hesitation that Poirot noted, but didn't yet remark upon. Enemies? No, not Eleanor. She was kind, generous. Everyone loved her. She had her admirers, of course, but nothing sinister. I can't imagine who would— His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind at work. "Monsieur Haverford, let us consider the facts. The bridal suite was locked, the key inside, the windows bolted. Yet Mademoiselle Langston is dead, and her veil is torn. A curious detail, non? Did she speak of any concerns, any fears in the days leading to the wedding?" Charles shook his head, his expression one of bewildered pain. "She was nervous, naturally. What bride isn't? But nothing out of the ordinary. She was excited, planning every detail of the ceremony. She even chose the veil herself, a family heirloom from her mother. She was so proud to wear it." "An heirloom," Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And this veil, it was torn deliberately. Did you notice anything unusual about her behavior last night, perhaps during the dinner?" Charles hesitated, his fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "She was quieter toward the end of the evening. I thought it was fatigue. She'd been so busy with preparations. But now," he paused, his brow furrowing. "There was a moment in the garden after dinner. I saw her speaking with someone, but I couldn't see who. She seemed agitated, but when I asked her later, she brushed it off as a trivial matter." Poirot's interest sharpened, though his expression remained serene. "A conversation in the garden, you say, and you did not see her companion?" "No," Charles admitted. "It was dark, and I was some distance away, near the terrace. I didn't want to intrude. Eleanor valued her privacy, and I trusted her." "Trust," Poirot murmured, almost to himself. "A noble quality, but one that can blind us. Tell me, monsieur, were there others who might have held her heart before you? A rival, perhaps, or a friend with deeper feelings?" Charles's face darkened, a flush creeping up his neck. "You're suggesting something improper. Eleanor was loyal, devoted. There was no one else. Yes, she had suitors before we met. Beatrice Crane, her friend, once fancied me, I believe. But that was years ago, before Eleanor and I were engaged. It was nothing serious." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with quiet scrutiny. "Mademoiselle Crane, you say? And yet The heart does not always forget so easily, no? Very well, Monsieur Haverford. I thank you for your candour. We shall speak again. As Charles rose, his movements heavy with grief, Poirot signalled to Hastings to remain. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire, and Poirot's gaze lingered on the empty sofa where Charles had sat. "What do you make of him, Hastings?" he asked, his voice low. Hastings rubbed his chin, frowning. Poor chap's heartbroken, that's clear. But don't know, Poirot. There's something in his manner. Those trembling hands, that hesitation when you asked about enemies. Could he be hiding something? Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Précisément, mon ami. The grief. It is genuine, but grief can mask other truths. His account of the evening is clear, yet this conversation in the garden, it intrigues me. Why did Mademoiselle Langston not share her agitation with him? And this veil, torn with such purpose, it speaks of passion, of a personal vendetta. Hastings paced to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. But the locked room, Poirot. How could anyone get in or out? The key was inside, the windows bolted. It's impossible. Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. Impossible? No. Hastings. The impossible is merely a lock waiting for the right key. We must learn more of this garden encounter, of Mademoiselle Crane, and of Monsieur Haverford's trust. The heart, it is a complex mechanism, and it may yet reveal its secrets. The door opened, and a hotel porter announced the arrival of Inspector Japp, a sturdy figure in a grey overcoat, his face grim. "Poirot, you old devil," Japp said, striding in. "I heard you were here, poking your nose into this mess. A locked-room murder, eh? Just your sort of puzzle." Poirot rose, his bow precise. "Inspector Japp, a pleasure, as always. Yes, a puzzle, but one that Hercule Poirot will unravel. Have you spoken with the coroner?" Japp nodded, pulling a notebook from his pocket. "Preliminary report says cyanide, likely ingested within an hour of death. No marks on the body, save for that torn veil. We found a vial under the chaise, empty, with traces of the stuff. Nasty business." "Cyanide," Poirot repeated, his eyes gleaming. "A poison, swift and merciless. And the vial, its label. Was it legible?" "Partially," Japp replied. "Something about a chemical, possibly from a photography lab. We're checking it now." Poirot's mind raced, though his face betrayed nothing. "Photography, you say? Interesting. We shall need to speak with all who were close to Mademoiselle Langston, her friends, her family, her rivals. And we must examine this vial, this key, this veil. Each is a piece of the mosaic." Japp grunted, clearly sceptical, but accustomed to Poirot's methods. "Right, I'll leave you to your mosaics. But mark my words, Poirot, this one's a devil of a case. A locked room, a dead bride, and a hotel full of suspects. You've got your work cut out." As Japp departed, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression one of quiet determination. "The work, mon ami. It is what the little grey cells thrive upon. Let us summon Mademoiselle Crane next. Her story, I suspect, will add another thread to this tangled web." Hastings nodded, though his eyes betrayed his unease. The Hotel Royal, with its glittering facade, now seemed a stage for a darker drama, one where love, jealousy, and betrayal danced in the shadows. And at its centre stood Hercule Poirot, his mind a beacon in the fog, ready to illuminate the truth. Chapter 3. The Rival's Shadow. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Hotel Royal's drawing-room, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany furniture and the intricate Persian rug beneath. Yet the warmth of the sun could not dispel the chill that lingered in the air, a residue of the tragedy that had unfolded in the bridal suite. Hercule Poirot sat in his chosen armchair, his small frame erect, his hands folded neatly in his lap, and his moustache a perfect crescent of precision. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on the woman who entered the room, her steps measured, but her posture betraying a flicker of unease. Captain Hastings, standing near the fireplace, adjusted his tie, his gaze darting between Poirot and their new interviewee. Miss Beatrice Crane was a vision of elegance, her auburn hair swept into an intricate chignon, her emerald green dress accentuating the porcelain pallor of her skin. At 28, she possessed a beauty that was both striking and severe, her high cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes lending her an air of intensity. Yet there was a brittleness to her, a tension in the way her fingers clasped the small silk reticule she carried, as if it were an anchor against a storm. "Mademoiselle Crane," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished stone, "I thank you for joining us. The loss of Mademoiselle Langston is a sorrow most profound, and I understand you were her closest friend. Permit me to express my condolences." Beatrice's lips tightened, and she inclined her head, her eyes briefly meeting Poirot's before settling on a point above his shoulder. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Eleanor was like a sister to me. Her death is unimaginable." Her voice was low, carefully modulated, but there was a tremor beneath the words, a crack in the facade. Poirot tilted his head, his gaze never wavering. "A sister, you say? And yet, even sisters may harbor secrets, no? Tell me, mademoiselle, when did you last see Mademoiselle Langston?" Beatrice's fingers tightened on her reticule, the silk creasing under her grip. "Last night, at the rehearsal dinner. We spoke briefly after the meal near the ballroom. She was in high spirits, excited about the wedding. I left her around 9:30 to retire to my room." "And you did not see her again?" Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp, like a hawk watching its prey. "No," Beatrice replied, her voice firm, but her eyes flickering. "I went to my room on the 4th floor and stayed there until this morning, when I heard the terrible news." Hastings, unable to restrain himself, leaned forward. "But dash it all, Miss Crane, someone poisoned her. In a locked room, no less. Did Eleanor mention anyone who might have wished her harm? Any quarrels, any jealousies?" Beatrice's gaze darted to Hastings, a flash of irritation crossing her features before she composed herself. "Eleanor was beloved, Captain Hastings. She had no enemies that I knew of. Of course, her charm and wealth drew envy. Such is the way of the world. But to kill her—" She shook her head, as if the thought were too monstrous to entertain. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his skepticism. "Envy, mademoiselle, is a powerful force, and you, as her friend, knew her heart. Was there no one who might have envied her happiness with Monsieur Haverford? No one, perhaps, who once held hopes of his affection." Beatrice's cheeks flushed, a delicate pink that spread to her throat. "You're referring to me, I presume?" Her voice was sharp now, edged with defiance. "Yes, I cared for Charles years ago, before he and Eleanor were engaged. We were young, foolish. I thought myself in love. But it was a fleeting thing. I was happy for them, truly. Eleanor deserved every joy." Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his smile remained courteous. "The heart, mademoiselle, is not always so generous. You say you were happy. Yet last night, Mademoiselle Langston was seen in the garden, engaged in an argument. Could it have been with you? Beatrice's breath caught, and for a moment her composure wavered. An argument? No, Monsieur Poirot, you are mistaken. I spoke with Eleanor in the ballroom, as I said. I did not see her in the garden. Her words were quick, almost too quick, and her fingers twisted the reticule until the silk threatened to tear. Poirot leaned back, his hands steepling before him. Curious, no? For Monsieur Haverford himself mentioned seeing Mademoiselle Langston in the garden, speaking with someone in a manner most agitated. If not you, then who? Beatrice's eyes widened, and she rose abruptly, her reticule falling to the floor with a soft thud. I don't know. I wasn't there. You must believe me, Monsieur Poirot. I loved Eleanor. I would never harm her. Her voice trembled, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears, though whether from grief or fear, Poirot could not yet discern. Hastings, ever the gentleman, retrieved the reticule and handed it to her, his expression softening. No one's accusing you, Miss Crane. We're only trying to understand what happened. If you know anything at all, it could help. Beatrice took the reticule, her hands shaking slightly. I've told you all I know, she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. Eleanor was my friend. I wanted her to be happy. If she argued with someone, it wasn't me. Perhaps it was a guest, or someone from her past. I don't know. Poirot studied her, his mind cataloguing every gesture, every inflection. The flush of her cheeks, the rapid blinking of her eyes, the way her fingers clutched the reticule as if it were a lifeline. All spoke of something unspoken. Very well, mademoiselle, he said at last. You have been most helpful. We shall speak again, I think. As Beatrice left, her steps quick and her head held high, Hastings turned to Poirot, his brow furrowed. What do you make of her, Poirot? She's shaken, no doubt. But that business about the garden, she seemed rattled when you mentioned it. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Précisément, mon ami. Mademoiselle Crane is a woman of strong emotions, carefully guarded. Her denial of the garden encounter, it lacks conviction. And her past with Monsieur Haverford, though she dismisses it, lingers like a shadow. We must learn more of this argument, and of Mademoiselle Crane's movements last night. Hastings paced to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. But the locked room, Poirot. Even if she was in the garden, how could she get into the suite? The key was inside, the windows bolted. It's a confounded mystery. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a gleam of anticipation in his eyes. A mystery, yes, but not without its clues. The torn veil, the poison, the locked door. These are the threads of our tapestry. Mademoiselle Crane may not have spoken the truth, but she has given us a glimpse of her heart. And the heart, Hastings, is where the truth often hides. The door opened, and the hotel manager, Mr. Dubois, appeared, his face pale and his hands clasped nervously. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Japp requests your presence in the bridal suite. They've found something, a small detail, but he thought you'd want to see it. Poirot rose, his movements graceful and deliberate. Merci, Monsieur Dubois. Come, Hastings. The little grey cells, they are eager for more pieces of this puzzle. As they left the drawing-room, the weight of Beatrice Crane's words lingered, her denial a fragile shield against the growing web of suspicion. The Hotel Royal, with its glittering facade, was a stage for secrets, and Poirot knew that the rival's shadow stretched far beyond the ballroom's lights. Chapter 4. The curious guest, the corridors of the Hotel Royal, with their plush carpets and gilded sconces, seemed to hush the world outside. Yet the air within was heavy with the unspoken weight of the tragedy. Hercule Poirot moved with his characteristic precision, his patent leather shoes silent against the floor, his small frame a study in composure. Captain Hastings followed, his brow creased with the strain of the morning's revelations, his hands fidgeting as if seeking something solid to grasp in this maze of mystery. They were en route to the hotel's library, a quieter space chosen for their next interview, where the scent of aged leather and polished wood offered a brief respite from the opulence of the drawing-room. The library's tall shelves loomed like sentinels, their volumes bound in rich hues of burgundy and navy, and a single chandelier cast a soft, amber glow over the scene. Poirot. Lionel Gray awaited them, seated at a long oak table, his thin frame hunched slightly as he adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. At 40, he was an unremarkable man, his sandy hair thinning at the temples, his grey suit well-tailored but lacking flair. His hands, however, betrayed a nervous energy, fingers tapping a staccato rhythm against the table's edge, pausing only to push his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. "Monsieur Gray," Poirot began, settling into a chair opposite, with a grace that belied the intensity of his scrutiny. "You are, I understand, a cousin of Mademoiselle Langston, though not a close one. Your presence at her wedding was a gesture of familial duty, oui?" Lionel nodded, his eyes darting to Poirot and then to Hastings, who stood by a bookshelf, his arms crossed. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. Eleanor and I weren't particularly close. Our families diverged years ago, but I felt it right to attend. She invited me personally, and I couldn't refuse." Poirot's moustache curved slightly, a sign of his mind at work. "Most commendable. And yet, monsieur, you have already provided a piece of the puzzle that intrigues me. You mentioned to the police that you saw Mademoiselle Langston in the hotel gardens last night, engaged in an argument. This is correct?" Lionel's fingers stilled, and a faint flush crept up his neck. "Yes, that's true. It was after the rehearsal dinner, around 10, I'd say. I'd stepped outside for some air. The ballroom was stifling. I saw Eleanor near the rose arbor, speaking with someone. She seemed upset, her voice raised, though I couldn't hear the words. Hastings, unable to contain his curiosity, stepped forward. "And you didn't think to go closer, man? To see who it was, or what was wrong?" Lionel's eyes flickered with unease, and he adjusted his spectacles again, a gesture that seemed more reflex than necessity. No, I didn't. It felt private, you see. Eleanor was a private person, and I thought it best not to intrude. I returned to my room shortly after." Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes piercing. "A private person, you say, yet arguing in a public garden. Most curious. Could you discern anything of her companion? A silhouette, perhaps, or the colour of a dress?" Lionel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. "It was dark, Monsieur Poirot. The garden was lit only by lanterns, and they were some distance away. I saw two figures, one clearly Eleanor in her sapphire gown. The other, I couldn't say. Taller than her, perhaps, but I didn't linger." Poirot's fingers steepled before him, a familiar sign of his mind weaving connections. "And you returned to your room. At what hour, precisely?" 10:15, I believe," Lionel replied, his voice steadier now. "I read for a bit, photography journals mostly, then went to bed. I heard nothing until the commotion this morning." "Photography," Poirot repeated, his tone deceptively mild. "A fascinating hobby, no? It requires chemicals, does it not? Some, perhaps, that are dangerous?" Lionel's flush deepened, and he sat straighter, his hands flattening on the table. "Yes, I'm an amateur photographer. But I don't carry chemicals with me, Monsieur Poirot. My dark room is at home, in London. Surely you're not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing, monsieur," Poirot interjected, his smile disarming, yet laced with intent. "I merely observe. The poison that killed Mademoiselle Langston was cyanide, a substance sometimes used in photographic processes. You understand why I must ask." Lionel's eyes widened, and he pushed his spectacles up with a trembling finger. "I understand, but I assure you, I had nothing to do with it. I barely knew Eleanor. Why would I harm her?" Poirot's gaze softened, though his mind remained sharp. "Motive, monsieur, is like a shadow. It follows where the light falls. Tell me, what was your impression of Mademoiselle Langston's relationship with Monsieur Haverford?" Lionel hesitated, his fingers resuming their nervous tapping. "They seemed happy. Charles is a good sort, charming, well off. Eleanor was radiant with him, always smiling. But—" he paused, as if weighing his words. "There was a tension, I thought, at the dinner. Not between them, but around them. I noticed Miss Crane, Beatrice, watching them closely. She and Eleanor were friends, but there was something in her eyes. I can't explain it." Hastings raised an eyebrow, glancing at Poirot. "Jealousy, perhaps?" Miss Crane admitted to an old affection for Haverford. Lionel shrugged, his shoulders hunching slightly. "Perhaps. I'm no expert on such things. I only noticed because I was seated near her at the dinner." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every nuance. "And this argument in the garden, Monsieur Gray, you are certain you could not identify the other person? Not even a hint of their manner, their voice?" Lionel shook his head, his expression earnest. "I wish I could help more, but it was too dark, too far. I only saw Eleanor's distress, and thought it best to leave her to it." "Very well," Poirot said, rising with a fluid motion. "You have been most cooperative, monsieur. We shall speak again, I think, as the pieces of this puzzle come together." As Lionel stood, his movements awkward, he adjusted his spectacles one last time before leaving the library. The door closed softly behind him, and Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "What do you make of him, Poirot? He's nervous as a cat, but he doesn't strike me as a murderer." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet intensity. "Nervous, yes, mon ami, but nerves do not always signify guilt. Monsieur Gray is a man who sees more than he says, yet he holds back. His account of the garden is vague, too vague, perhaps, and his interest in photography, it is a thread we must follow, given the nature of the poison." Hastings paced to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "But the locked room, Poirot. Even if he saw something, how does it explain the cyanide, the key, the bolted windows? It's like chasing a ghost." Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a spark of anticipation in his gaze. "A ghost, perhaps, but one that leaves footprints. The garden argument, the torn veil, the cyanide, these are not random. They form a pattern, Hastings, and the little grey cells will find its shape. Let us now see what Inspector Japp has discovered in the bridal suite. The clues, they await us." As they left the library, the weight of Lionel Gray's words lingered, his hesitancy a faint ripple in the growing tide of suspicion. The Hotel Royal, with its elegant facade, was a labyrinth of secrets, and Poirot knew that the curious guest had revealed more than he intended. Chapter 5. The torn veil, the bridal suite of the Hotel Royal, once a haven of anticipation and joy, now stood as a silent witness to tragedy. Its ivory silk walls, adorned with delicate gold filigree, seemed to mock the sombre scene within. Hercule Poirot entered with his characteristic precision, his polished shoes silent on the thick Aubusson carpet, his green eyes scanning every detail with the intensity of a watchmaker examining a delicate mechanism. Captain Hastings followed, his face pale, his usual vigour subdued by the oppressive stillness of the room. Inspector Japp awaited them near the chaise longue where Eleanor Langston's body had lain, now removed by the coroner's men, leaving only the ghostly outline of her form in the crushed velvet. "Poirot, you're here at last," Japp said, his gruff voice softened by the weight of the moment. He gestured to the chaise, where the torn veil still rested, its lace edges frayed like the remnants of a shattered dream. "We've gone over the room again, and I thought you'd want a closer look before we disturb anything further. That veil, it's a queer thing, isn't it?" Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching as he approached the chaise. "Queer, oui, Inspector, but also eloquent. The veil speaks where the victim cannot." He knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the lace without touching it, his eyes tracing the deliberate tear that ran from the crown to the hem. The fabric, delicate as a spider's web, was an heirloom, Charles Haverford had said, a relic of Eleanor's mother, worn with pride. Yet now its beauty was marred, the tear a jagged wound that seemed to pulse with intent. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his voice low but commanding. "This is no accident, no careless snag. The tear is precise, made with force, yet not with a blade. It was pulled, ripped by hand, as if in anger or defiance." Hastings, standing near the mahogany table, frowned, his hands clasped behind his back. Defiance. "You mean someone wanted to send a message? But who, Poirot? And how did they get in here? The key was in the lock, the windows bolted tight." Poirot rose, his movements fluid, and turned to the door. The brass key gleamed in the lock, its position undisturbed since the maid's discovery. He examined it closely, noting its weight, its fit, the faint sheen of use. "The key. It is as it appears. Inside, untouched. Yet the room was locked when the maid entered. This suggests, perhaps, that the murderer did not leave by the door, or that they possessed another means." Japp snorted, though his eyes betrayed curiosity. "Another means? Come now, Poirot, you're not suggesting secret passages or some such nonsense. This is a modern hotel, not a Gothic manor." Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a flicker of amusement in his gaze. "No, Inspector, no secret passages. But the mind, it creates its own passages, its own deceptions. Let us consider the room itself." He moved to the windows, their heavy brocade curtains drawn back to reveal sturdy bolts, rusted slightly from disuse. He tested each, confirming their rigidity. "Sealed, as you say. No entry here." His attention shifted to the table, where a single champagne flute stood, its contents flat, the bubbles long gone. Beside it lay a silver tray with a crystal decanter, half filled with water, and a small vase of white roses, their petals unblemished. Poirot leaned closer, his nose twitching as he inhaled. A faint bitter scent lingered, not from the champagne, but from the air near the chaise. "Amandes," he murmured. "Almonds. The signature of cyanide, non?" Japp nodded, producing a small evidence bag from his pocket. Within it was a glass vial, no larger than a thimble, its label scratched but faintly legible. Found it under the chaise, tucked in the carpet. Traces of cyanide inside, no doubt about it. The coroner's certain that's what killed her. Ingested, likely within the hour before she was found. Poirot took the bag, holding it to the light. The label bore fragments of text. Graphic, chem, suggesting a photographic compound, as Japp had mentioned. This vial, it is a clue most vital, Poirot said, his voice soft but intense. Cyanide is not a common household item, yet it is accessible to those who know where to look. A photographer, perhaps, or one familiar with such chemicals. Hastings, his curiosity piqued, stepped closer. "You're thinking of Lionel Gray, aren't you? He mentioned his photography hobby. Could he have brought this here?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, but he raised a cautionary hand. "We must not leap, mon ami. Monsieur Gray is a possibility, yes, but so too is anyone with access to such substances. The vial may have been planted or stolen. We must consider all threads." He handed the bag back to Japp, his mind already turning to the veil. He returned to the chaise, lifting the veil with gloved fingers, careful not to disturb its folds. The tear was not clean, but ragged, as if torn in a moment of passion. "This veil," he said, almost to himself. "It is more than a garment. It is a symbol of love, of tradition, of a future promised. To tear it is to reject that promise, to strike at the heart of Mademoiselle Langston's joy. The murderer, they wished not only to kill but to wound." Hastings shivered, his honest face troubled. "It's beastly, Poirot, to do this to a bride on her wedding day. Whoever it was must have hated her fiercely." "Hatred, oui," Poirot agreed, his gaze distant. "Or perhaps love, twisted into something dark. The heart, it is a complex organ, capable of great beauty and great cruelty." He set the veil down, his fingers lingering on its edge. "We must learn more of those who surrounded Mademoiselle Langston, her groom, her friend, her cousin. Each holds a piece of this puzzle." Japp, scribbling in his notebook, looked up. "I've got men questioning the staff, and we're checking the guest list for anyone with a grudge. But this locked room business, it's got me stumped. You're sure there's no trick to it, Poirot? No hidden hinges or false walls?" Poirot's smile was patient, almost indulgent. "The Hotel Royal is no house of tricks, Inspector. The answer lies not in the walls, but in the minds of those who walked these halls last night. The key, the vial, the veil. These are the tools of the crime. But the motive, it is the key to the killer." As they left the suite, Poirot paused, his eyes lingering on the door. "Hastings," he said quietly, "mark this well. The torn veil is not merely a clue, but a confession. The murderer could not resist leaving their mark, and in that mark we shall find them." Hastings nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "I hope you're right, Poirot. This whole affair feels like a nightmare, one I'd rather wake from." Poirot's gaze softened, but his resolve was iron. "We shall awaken, mon ami, when the truth is laid bare. Let us now speak with the maid who found the body. Her eyes, they may have seen more than she knows." The door closed behind them, the bridal suite once again silent, its secrets locked within its walls. But Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was already unravelling the threads, each clue a step closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 6. The Duplicate Key. The Hotel Royal's manager's office was a bastion of order. its walls lined with oak panelling, and its desk a fortress of polished walnut, cluttered only with a neatly arranged blotter, an inkstand, and a single leather-bound ledger. Mr. Dubois, the manager, stood behind the desk, his fastidious demeanour fraying at the edges as he faced Hercule Poirot's piercing gaze. His thin moustache quivered slightly, and his hands, usually steady, fidgeted with a brass paperweight. Poirot sat opposite, his small frame radiating authority, his green eyes sharp as they surveyed the room. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his arms crossed, his honest face creased with the strain of the morning's grim discoveries. "Monsieur Dubois," Poirot began, his voice smooth yet insistent, like a violin bow drawing a clear note. "You have been most cooperative, and for this I am grateful. The tragedy of Mademoiselle Langston's death is a stain upon the honour of your fine establishment. To remove it, we must examine every detail, however small. Let us speak of the key to the bridal suite." Dubois nodded, his expression a mix of deference and unease. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. The bridal suite has only one key, a heavy brass one given to Miss Langston upon her arrival yesterday afternoon. She insisted on keeping it herself, as is customary for brides seeking privacy." Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind at work. "One key, you say? And no others? No spares, no duplicates that might reside in this office, perhaps?" Dubois hesitated, his fingers tightening on the paperweight. "Well, there is a spare, naturally. For emergencies, you understand. It is kept in a locked box in this very office, under my personal supervision." He gestured to a small safe in the corner, its black iron surface gleaming under the light of a single desk lamp. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And this spare, monsieur, may I see it?" Dubois, with a faint air of reluctance, moved to the safe, his hands steadying as he worked the combination. The door swung open, revealing a small wooden box within. He retrieved it, unlocked it with a key from his waistcoat pocket, and produced a brass key, identical in design to the one found in the bridal suite's lock. "Here it is," he said, holding it out. "It has not been touched, I assure you." Poirot took the key, his gloved fingers turning it slowly in the light. Its surface was polished, but a faint scratch marred its edge, a hairline imperfection that might have gone unnoticed by a less discerning eye. "Most interesting," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "This scratch, Monsieur Dubois. It suggests use, perhaps recent use. Tell me, who has access to this safe?" Dubois' face paled, and he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture. "Only myself, Monsieur Poirot. The combination is known to no one else, and the key to the box remains on my person at all times. It is impossible for anyone to have taken it without my knowledge." "Impossible," Poirot repeated, his tone laced with a trace of irony. "A word I hear often today, yet one that rarely holds true. Tell me, monsieur, have you ever left this office unattended, perhaps during the festivities last night?" Dubois stiffened, his eyes darting to the side. Well, yes, briefly. The rehearsal dinner required my oversight, guests to greet, staff to manage. I stepped out for perhaps an hour, but the office was locked, and the safe is secure. No one could have entered." Poirot's smile was polite, but unyielding. "No, one, you say. Yet a key. It can be copied, none. A moment's access, a skilled hand, and a duplicate is made. Such things are not so difficult for one determined." Hastings, unable to contain himself, stepped forward. "Good Lord, Poirot, You're saying someone made a copy of the spare key. That would explain how they got into the suite and locked it again. But who could have done it? Poirot handed the key back to Dubois, his gaze never leaving the manager's face. That, mon ami, is what we must discover. Monsieur Dubois, you will please ensure that this key remains secure, and you will inform me if anyone has shown undue interest in your office or its contents. Dubois nodded, his relief palpable as he returned the key to its box. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I shall be vigilant. As they left the office, Poirot's mind was already weaving the threads of the mystery. The scratch on the key, though small, was a beacon in the fog, a sign that the locked room was not as impenetrable as it seemed. He paused in the corridor, his eyes distant as Hastings hovered at his side. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low. "This duplicate key business, it's a game-changer, isn't it? Someone could have slipped in, poisoned Eleanor, and locked the door behind them, leaving the original key inside. It's devilishly clever." "Oui, Hastings," Poirot replied, his tone thoughtful. "Clever, but not without risk. To make a duplicate requires access, opportunity, and skill. We must consider who among our suspects had such means. Monsieur Haverford, perhaps as the groom, might have sought access to the suite. Mademoiselle Crane, with her shadowed motives, could have seized a moment. Even Monsieur Gray, with his nervous demeanor, may know more than he admits." Hastings rubbed his chin, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "And the staff, the maid, Clara, she has a master key, doesn't she? Could she have been involved?" Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly against his cane. "A possibility, mon ami, though the master key would not explain the locked door from within. No, the duplicate is our path forward. We must learn who had the opportunity to visit this office, to handle the spare. And we must not forget the vial of cyanide, the torn veil. These, too, point to a mind both bold and vengeful." They descended the grand staircase, the hotel's festive air now a hollow echo, its chandeliers casting light on a scene darkened by murder. Poirot's thoughts turned to the maid, Clara, whose scream had pierced the morning's calm. "Let us find Mademoiselle Clara," he said, his voice resolute. "Her eyes, they may have seen more than her words reveal. The duplicate key, it is but one lock in this chain of secrets, and Hercule Poirot will open them all." As they moved toward the servants' quarters, the Hotel Royal seemed to close in around them, its elegance a facade for the tangled motives within. The duplicate key was a clue, a crack in the mystery's surface, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the truth. Chapter 7. The Alibi's Crack. The servants' quarters of the Hotel Royal, tucked behind the grand kitchens and accessible only through a narrow, dimly lit corridor, were a stark contrast to the opulence of the guest floors. The air here was heavy with the scent of starch and polish, and the walls, painted a utilitarian grey, bore none of the gilt or glamour of the public spaces. Hercule Poirot navigated the passage with his usual precision, his cane tapping lightly on the worn floorboards, his small frame undiminished by the humble surroundings. Captain Hastings followed, his broad shoulders slightly hunched, as if the low ceiling pressed down on his spirits as much as his frame. The weight of the morning's discoveries, Eleanor Langston's poisoned body, the torn veil, the scratched key, hung between them like a fog, each clue a puzzle piece yet to find its place. They reached a small parlour used by the staff, its furnishings sparse but tidy. A wooden table, a few mismatched chairs, and a single window offering a glimpse of the hotel's service yard. Clara, the maid who had discovered Eleanor's body, stood waiting, her hands clasped tightly before her. She was a slight young woman, no more than 20, with mousy brown hair tucked beneath a starched cap, and eyes that darted nervously like those of a deer sensing a predator. Her apron was crisp, but her fingers twisted the fabric, betraying her agitation. "Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet commanding, like a conductor coaxing a note from a reluctant violin. "You have endured a shock most terrible this morning. To find Mademoiselle Langston in such a state, it is a burden no one should bear. I ask you now to share what you know, for your words may light the path to justice." Clara's eyes flicked to Poirot, then to Hastings, before settling on the floor. "I don't know much, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "I only did my duty. I knocked on the bridal suite door at 9:30, as Miss Langston had asked for me to bring fresh towels. There was no answer, so I used my master key to enter. That's when I saw her, lying there, so still, with that veil all torn." Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Poirot nodded, his green eyes softening, but never losing their sharpness. "A moment most distressing, oui. But let us go back, mademoiselle. Last night, during the rehearsal dinner, you were among the staff, were you not? Did you see Mademoiselle Langston, perhaps, or notice anything unusual?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her apron. "I was serving in the ballroom, sir, clearing plates and such. Miss Langston was there, looking beautiful in her blue dress. She was smiling, talking with the guests. But—" She paused, her brow furrowing, as if weighing whether to continue. "But," Poirot prompted, leaning forward slightly, his moustache twitching with anticipation. Clara's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I saw Miss Crane, Miss Beatrice Crane, near the bridal suite later, around 11. I was bringing linens to the 5th floor for another guest. She was standing by the door, looking furtive, like she didn't want to be seen. I thought it odd, but I didn't think much of it then. She's Miss Langston's friend, after all." Hastings, standing by the window, turned sharply. "Furtive, you say? Good heavens, Poirot, that's a bombshell. Miss Crane told us she was in her room by 10. She lied." Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm, but his mind clearly racing. "Let us be precise, mon ami. Mademoiselle Clara, you are certain of the time? And of what you saw?" Clara nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, sir. It was just after 11. I heard the clock in the hall chime. Miss Crane was near the suite door, holding something in her hand, though I couldn't see what. She saw me and hurried away, down the stairs. I didn't think it was my place to question her." Poirot's fingers steepled before him, a sign of his little grey cells at work. "Most illuminating, mademoiselle. And this object in her hand. Could it have been a key, perhaps?" Clara's brow creased. I suppose it could have been, sir, but it was too dark to tell. It was small, shiny, maybe. I'm sorry. I didn't get a good look." Poirot's smile was encouraging, though his eyes gleamed with intensity. "You have done well, mademoiselle. One final question. Did you see anyone else near the bridal suite last night, or hear anything unusual?" Clara shook her head, her cap slipping slightly. "No, sir. The floor was quiet after the dinner. Most guests were in the ballroom or their rooms. I went to bed myself after my rounds, around midnight." "Merci," Poirot said, rising with a graceful bow. "You have been most helpful. If you recall anything more, you will inform me, Oui? Clara nodded, her relief evident as she curtsied and hurried from the parlour. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Poirot and Hastings in the small, shadowed room. Hastings paced to the table, his hands clasped behind his back. Poirot, this is a breakthrough. Beatrice Crane, caught near the suite at 11, lying about her whereabouts. She must be involved. Poirot's gaze was distant, his fingers tapping lightly on his cane. Perhaps, mon ami, but we must not rush to judgment. Mademoiselle Crane's presence is significant, oui, but it is not proof. She held something, a key, perhaps, or something else. We must consider her motive, her opportunity. And we must not forget the others. Monsieur Haverford, with his trembling hands, or Monsieur Gray, with his vague account of the garden. Hastings frowned, his honest face troubled. But the locked room, Poirot? If Beatrice had a key, a duplicate, like you suggested, she could have entered, poisoned Eleanor, and locked the door again. It fits perfectly. Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a spark of caution in his eyes. It fits, yes, but a puzzle may have many pieces that seem to fit, yet only one is true. The cyanide, the torn veil. These suggest a crime of passion, not merely opportunity. We must learn more of Mademoiselle Crane's heart, and of the others who moved in Mademoiselle Langston's orbit. The door opened, and a young porter appeared, his face flushed with urgency. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Japp sends word. He's in the manager's office. Says they've found something in the guest records. Something about Miss Crane's stay. Poirot's eyes lit up, his posture straightening. Excellent. Come, Hastings. The web of this mystery grows tighter. Let us see what new thread the good inspector has uncovered. As they left the servants' quarters, the narrow corridor seemed to pulse with secrets, each revelation a step closer to the truth. Beatrice Crane's lie was a crack in her alibi, but Poirot knew that the heart of the murderer lay hidden in the shadows of motive and opportunity, waiting for his little grey cells to bring it to light. Chapter 8. The Poison's Source. The manager's office of the Hotel Royal, with its polished walnut desk and oak-panelled walls, seemed to shrink under the weight of the unfolding mystery. The air was thick with the scent of ink and wax, and the single lamp cast long shadows that danced across the ledger books. Hercule Poirot stood near the desk, his small frame radiating a quiet intensity, his green eyes sharp as they followed Inspector Japp's movements. Captain Hastings hovered by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mixture of curiosity and unease as he watched Japp produce a folded sheet from his notebook. The revelations of the morning, the torn veil, the scratched key, Clara's sighting of Beatrice Crane had tightened the web of suspicion, and now a new thread awaited. Poirot, you'll want to see this, Japp said, his voice gruff but tinged with excitement. He unfolded the sheet, revealing a page from the hotel's guest records. My men went through the bookings, and there's something odd about Miss Crane's stay. She checked in 2 days ago. Not one, as she claimed. And she requested a room change yesterday morning to the 5th floor, right near the bridal suite. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his little grey cells sparking. Most interesting, Inspector. Mademoiselle Crane did not mention this earlier stay, nor her proximity to Mademoiselle Langston's suite. A curious omission, no? Hastings turned from the window, his brow furrowed. By Jove, Poirot, that's damning. She was closer to the crime than she let on, and lying about it to boot. Could she have been planning this all along? Poirot raised a cautionary hand, his expression serene, but his mind clearly racing. Patience, mon ami. The lie, it is significant, but it is not yet proof. Let us consider the facts. Mademoiselle Crane moves to the 5th floor, near the suite. She is seen there at 11, holding something, perhaps a key. But we must also consider the poison itself. Inspector, you have news of the cyanide. Japp nodded, pulling a small evidence bag from his coat pocket. Within it was the glass vial from the bridal suite, its scratched label glinting faintly. The coroner's report is final. Cyanide, no question. Ingested, likely through a drink, about an hour before death, so between 8:30 and 9:30 this morning. This vial had traces of it, and the label suggests it's a photographic chemical, though the exact source is unclear. We're checking local suppliers, but it's not rare stuff. Anyone with a dark room could get it. Poirot took the bag, holding it to the light with gloved fingers. The label's fragments, photo, chem, aligned with Japp's assessment, but the vial's small size and delicate craftsmanship suggested it was not a common container. A photographic chemical, oui, Poirot murmured, and Monsieur Gray, our nervous cousin, has spoken of his photography hobby. A coincidence, perhaps, but Hercule Poirot does not trust coincidences. Hastings stepped closer, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. You're thinking Gray might have supplied the cyanide. He was vague about that garden argument, and now this vial ties to his hobby. But how would it end up in Beatrice's hands, if she's the one who used it? Poirot's smile was enigmatic, a flicker of anticipation in his gaze. A question most pertinent, Hastings. The vial may belong to one, yet be used by another. We must trace its path. Inspector, have you questioned the staff about visitors to Monsieur Gray's room, or perhaps to Mademoiselle Crane's? Japp shook his head, scribbling a note. Not yet, but I'll have my men on it. We're also looking into the hotel's chemical stores, cleaning supplies, that sort of thing. Cyanide's not standard, but you never know with these fancy places. Poirot handed the bag back, his mind turning to the broader canvas of the crime. The cyanide, it is swift, silent, a killer that requires knowledge and intent. It was administered in the suite, yet the champagne flute was untouched. How, then, was it given? A drink, perhaps, or something else? He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on his cane. And the torn veil. Its violence suggests a personal act, not a cold calculation. We must look to the hearts of our suspects. They left the office, descending to the hotel's lounge, a quieter space where the hum of guest chatter had faded to whispers in the wake of the tragedy. Poirot requested Lionel Gray's presence, and within minutes the unassuming cousin arrived, his spectacles slipping down his nose, his hands fidgeting as he sat. His grey suit was as nondescript as ever, but his eyes held a wariness that had not been so pronounced in their last meeting. Monsieur Gray, Poirot began, his voice smooth but probing, we have learned more of the poison that killed Mademoiselle Langston. Cyanide, a substance used in photography, was found in a vial beneath her chaise. You have spoken of your interest in this art. Tell me, have you such chemicals in your possession? Lionel's face paled, and he pushed his spectacles up with a trembling finger. Yes, I have a dark room at home, Monsieur Poirot, but I brought nothing here. My equipment is in London, and I've not touched cyanide in months. Anyone could get it. It's not as rare as you think. Chemists sell it, or... He trailed off, his eyes darting to the side. Or, Poirot prompted, leaning forward, his gaze like a needle-piercing fabric. Lionel swallowed, his voice dropping. Or someone could have taken it from a supplier, or even a medical source. I don't know. I only know I had nothing to do with this. Poirot studied him, noting the sweat beading on his brow, the rapid blink of his eyes. And yet, monsieur, you were in the garden last night, witnessing an argument you did not report until pressed. You claim ignorance of the other party, yet your memory is vague. Why, I wonder, do you hold back? Lionel's hands clenched, his knuckles whitening. I'm not holding back. I told you what I saw. Eleanor, upset, with someone in the shadows. I didn't want to get involved. I'm no detective, Monsieur Poirot. I came for a wedding, not this. Hastings, unable to restrain himself, interjected. But dash it all, man, a woman's dead. If you saw something, you should have spoken up. And this cyanide business, your photography makes you a prime suspect. Lionel's eyes widened, and he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Suspect? That's absurd. I barely knew Eleanor. I had no reason to harm her. You're grasping at straws. Poirot raised a calming hand, his voice steady. Sit, monsieur. We grasp at no straws, only truths. You will please inform us if you recall anything more of that garden scene, or of any visitors to your room who might have sought your expertise. Lionel sat, his shoulders slumping, his defiance fading. I've told you all I know, he muttered, but his eyes avoided Poirot's, a detail the detective noted with interest. As Lionel departed, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression thoughtful. He is nervous, oui, but not necessarily guilty. The cyanide links to him, yet the vial could belong to another. And Mademoiselle Crane's proximity to the suite, her lie about her whereabouts, these weave a net around her. Hastings rubbed his chin, his voice low. It's a devil of a puzzle, Poirot. The cyanide, the key, Beatrice's lie. How do they fit? And that locked room. It's like a conjurer's trick. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. A trick, perhaps, but one we shall unravel. Let us return to the garden, Hastings. The argument Mademoiselle Langston had. It is a thread we must pull. The poisoned source is but one piece. The heart of this crime lies in what was said under those lantern-lit roses. As they moved toward the hotel's gardens, the Royale's elegance seemed a fragile veneer, its halls echoing with secrets. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, each clue a note in a symphony of truth, waiting to be played. Chapter 9. The Garden Encounter. The gardens of the Hotel Royal were a haven of manicured beauty, their rose beds and gravel paths bathed in the soft light of late morning. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of ancient yews, and the distant hum of the hotel's activity faded, leaving only the whisper of nature and the weight of unspoken secrets. Hercule Poirot walked the path with his characteristic precision, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, his green eyes scanning the surroundings as if the flowers themselves might yield a clue. Captain Hastings followed, his stride less certain, his honest face creased with the frustration of a puzzle that refused to resolve. The revelations of the day, the scratched key, Beatrice Crane's lie, the cyanide vial, had tightened the web of suspicion, yet the truth remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of the previous night. Poirot paused at a secluded bench near a rose arbor, its wooden slats weathered but sturdy, its position offering a view of the hotel's terrace, yet shielded by a curtain of climbing roses. The arbor's lattice was draped with crimson blooms, their scent heavy in the air. But Poirot's attention was drawn to the ground beneath. The earth was scuffed, a subtle disturbance in the otherwise pristine gravel, and a single rose stem lay broken, its petals scattered like confetti from a ruined celebration. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot said, kneeling with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious nature. He pointed to the scuffed earth, his gloved finger tracing the outline of a footprint, faint but distinct. Here, something occurred. A struggle, perhaps, or a moment of agitation. This is where Mademoiselle Langston argued, as Monsieur Gray described. Hastings crouched beside him, his eyes narrowing. "A struggle, you say? It looks like someone stamped about, but it's hard to tell much from this. Could it have been Eleanor and her mysterious companion?" Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to a glint in the grass nearby. He reached down, retrieving a tiny pearl, no larger than a pinhead, its luster catching the sunlight. "A pearl, mon ami, likely from Mademoiselle Langston's gown. She wore a sapphire dress last night. Oui, with pearl embellishments, as Monsieur Haverford described. This confirms her presence here, in this very spot." Hastings stood, his hands on his hips. "By Jove, Poirot, this is something. Eleanor argued here, and now we've got proof. She was upset. But with whom? Lionel Gray said he couldn't see the other person, and Beatrice Crane denies being here at all. Could it have been Charles?" Poirot rose, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve, his expression thoughtful. "Possible, Hastings, but unlikely. Monsieur Haverford saw the argument from the terrace, a witness rather than a participant. No, we must consider others. Mademoiselle Crane, perhaps, whose lie about her whereabouts grows more suspicious, or even a guest we have yet to meet." He held the pearl to the light, its surface a tiny mirror reflecting his scrutiny. "This pearl, it is a whisper of the truth. But we need more." They walked the path, retracing the route from the arbor to the terrace, where lanterns had cast their glow the previous night. Poirot's eyes scanned the ground, the benches, the hedges, searching for any further sign of the encounter. Near a stone fountain, he paused again, noting a faint smudge on the gravel, a trace of mud out of place in the meticulously tended garden. "Curious," he murmured. "This mud, it is not from the path. It suggests someone came from beyond the formal gardens, perhaps the wooded area near the hotel's boundary." Hastings frowned, his mind struggling to keep pace. "The woods? But why would anyone go there? It's not exactly a stroll for a wedding guest, is it?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his little grey cells at work. Why indeed? Perhaps to meet in secret, away from prying eyes, or perhaps to dispose of something, a vial, a key, a trace of guilt. We must ask the groundskeeper if anything was found this morning. They continued their inspection, the garden's beauty a stark contrast to the dark purpose of their search. At the terrace's edge, Poirot stopped, his gaze fixed on the ballroom doors, their glass panels reflecting the rose arbor in miniature. "From here, Monsieur Haverford saw the argument," he said, almost to himself. "The distance is great, the light dim. He could not identify the other party, yet he sensed Mademoiselle Langston's distress. This encounter, it is the heart of our mystery." Hastings rubbed his chin, his voice low. "But how does it connect to the locked room, Poirot? Even if Eleanor argued with someone here, how did they get into the suite to poison her? The duplicate key, perhaps?" Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping his cane. The key, oui, is a possibility, but we must also consider the timing. The cyanide acted swiftly, within an hour of her death. If the argument was at 10, as Monsieur Gray claims, and the poison was administered between 8:30 and 9:30 this morning, the garden encounter may have been a prelude, not the act itself. Yet it set the stage, mon ami, a spark that ignited the flame of murder. A groundskeeper, a wiry man in a faded cap, approached at Poirot's summons, his hands stained with earth. "You wanted to see me, sir?" he asked, his voice rough but respectful. "Oui, monsieur," Poirot replied, his tone courteous. "This garden, it is your domain. Have you noticed anything unusual this morning? Objects out of place, perhaps, or signs of disturbance beyond this arbor?" The groundskeeper scratched his head, his eyes narrowing in thought. "Well, sir, there was something odd. Found a bit of cloth caught on a thorn in the wooded bit near the back gate. Looked like silk, dark-coloured, but I didn't think much of it. Thought it was from a guest's shawl or some such. I left it there, in case it was needed." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Show me, if you please." The groundskeeper led them to the hotel's boundary, where a narrow path wound into a copse of elms and brambles. There, on a thorny bush, hung a scrap of dark green silk, its edges frayed but unmistakable. Poirot examined it closely, noting its texture and hue. Silk, oui, and of fine quality. Mademoiselle Crane wore a green dress today. Did she not, Hastings? Hastings gasped, his eyes widening. "Good Lord, Poirot, you're right. Could this be from her? If she was out here last night, it blows her story apart." Poirot's smile was cautious, his mind weighing every possibility. "Perhaps, mon ami, but we must be certain. This silk could belong to another, or it may have been here before the argument. We shall have it compared to Mademoiselle Crane's attire." He turned to the groundskeeper. "You will preserve this, monsieur, and inform Inspector Japp of its location. It may be vital." As they returned to the hotel, the garden's tranquillity seemed a facade, its roses hiding thorns of deceit. Poirot's thoughts churned, the pearl and the silk forming new links in the chain of evidence. "The garden encounter," he said softly. "It was no mere quarrel. It was a collision of passions, Hastings, and it led to murder. We must press Mademoiselle Crane further, and we must learn if others walked this path last night." Hastings nodded, his expression grim. "It's a tangled mess, Poirot. The key, the poison, now this silk. How does it all fit?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. "Like a mosaic, mon ami. Each piece finds its place. The garden has spoken, and now we must listen to the hearts of those who stood here. The truth, it is close, but it hides in the shadows of love and betrayal." They re-entered the hotel, the grand doors closing behind them, sealing the secrets of the garden within. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, each clue a step toward unveiling the killer who had turned a wedding into a requiem. Chapter 10. The Confession's Edge. The drawing-room of the Hotel Royal, with its gold-flecked wallpaper and velvet drapes, had become a stage for truth, its elegance now overshadowed by the grim purpose of Hercule Poirot's inquiry. The fire in the marble hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the hall. Assembled suspects: Charles Haverford, his handsome features drawn with grief; Beatrice Crane, her emerald eyes guarded yet glinting with unease; and Lionel Gray, his spectacles slipping as he fidgeted nervously in his chair. Poirot stood at the room's centre, his small frame commanding attention, his moustache a perfect crescent above lips set in quiet determination. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his arms crossed, his honest face taut with anticipation as he watched Poirot prepare to unravel the threads of the mystery. "Monsieur, mesdames," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the room's heavy silence. "We are gathered to confront a crime most heinous. The murder of Mademoiselle Eleanor Langston, poisoned in a locked bridal suite, her veil torn, her future stolen. The facts, they are stubborn, yet they speak. The cyanide, the duplicate key, the garden encounter. Each is a piece of the mosaic. And now, with the aid of the little grey cells, we shall see the picture they form." Charles Haverford leaned forward, his hands clenched, his voice hoarse. "Monsieur Poirot, please, tell us who did this to Eleanor. I can't bear the uncertainty any longer." Poirot's eyes softened, but his gaze remained piercing. "Patience, Monsieur Haverford. The truth, it reveals itself in time. Let us begin with the scene of the crime. The bridal suite was locked, the key inside, the windows bolted. Yet Mademoiselle Langston was poisoned with cyanide, administered within an hour of her death, between 8:30 and 9:30 this morning. A vial, bearing traces of this poison, was found beneath her chaise, its label suggesting a photographic chemical. The veil, an heirloom, was torn with deliberate force, a gesture of passion, of rage." Beatrice Crane shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening on her reticule. "You speak as if you know the killer, Monsieur Poirot. Why drag us through this? Eleanor was my friend. I would never harm her." Poirot turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Mademoiselle Crane, your friendship is noted, yet your actions raise questions. You told us you were in your room by 10 last night, yet Clara, the maid, saw you near the bridal suite at 11, holding something. Perhaps a key. And your stay, it began 2 days ago. Not one, with a room change to the 5th floor, near Mademoiselle Langston's suite. Why these omissions?" Beatrice's cheeks flushed, and her voice rose, sharp with defiance. "I explained that. I went to wish Eleanor good night. I was on the 5th floor because I wanted to be near her, to help with the wedding. As for what I held, it was a gift, a small brooch, nothing more. I didn't lie." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of skepticism. "A brooch, you say? Yet you did not mention this gift before, nor your late-night visit. And in the garden, mademoiselle, a scrap of green silk was found, matching the hue of your dress. Were you there, perhaps arguing with Mademoiselle Langston, as Monsieur Gray observed?" Beatrice's eyes widened, and she stood, her reticule falling to the floor. "The garden? I wasn't there. I told you, I was in the ballroom, then my room. Lionel must be mistaken, or lying." Lionel Gray, his face paling, adjusted his spectacles with a trembling hand. "I'm not lying, Monsieur Poirot. I saw Eleanor in the garden, arguing with someone. It was dark, but I'm sure of what I saw. I didn't say it was Beatrice, because I couldn't be certain of the other person." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Charles. "And you, Monsieur Haverford, you saw this argument from the terrace, oui? You sensed Mademoiselle Langston's distress, yet you did not intervene. Why?" Charles's hands trembled, and he pressed them to his face, his voice breaking. "I thought it was trivial. A spat with a guest, perhaps. Eleanor was strong-willed. She didn't always share her troubles. I trusted her to handle it. If I'd known—" His words dissolved into a choked sob. "Hastings, unable to restrain himself, stepped forward. "Dash it all, Poirot, someone's not telling the truth." Beatrice was near the suite. Lionel saw the argument. Charles knew of it, yet we're no closer to the killer. The locked room, the poison. How does it all fit? Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but resolute. "It fits, mon ami, when we see the heart of the matter. The cyanide suggests knowledge, perhaps of photography, pointing to Monsieur Gray. The duplicate key, with its scratched spare, suggests access to Monsieur Dubois's office, possible for any of you. The torn veil speaks of passion, of a personal vendetta. And the garden encounter, it is the spark that lit this fire." He turned to Beatrice, his voice softening but unyielding. "Mademoiselle Crane, your love for Monsieur Haverford, it lingered, did it not? Years ago, you hoped for his affection, but Mademoiselle Langston won his heart. That wound, it did not heal." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "Yes, I loved Charles once, but I let it go. I was happy for Eleanor, I swear it. I didn't kill her." Poirot's gaze shifted to Lionel. "And you, Monsieur Gray, your vagueness about the garden, your knowledge of cyanide. Why do you shrink from the truth? Did you see more than you admit?" Lionel shook his head, his voice rising. "I've told you everything. I saw an argument, but I didn't interfere. I had no reason to hurt Eleanor." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind weaving the threads together. "The confession, it is near, yet it hides behind fear. One of you knows more than you say, and the little grey cells, they will uncover it." A knock at the door interrupted, and a porter entered, his face flushed. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Japp requests you in the manager's office. They've found a record of a late-night visitor to the hotel. A delivery, perhaps." Relevant Poirot's smile was faint, but determined. "Merci. We shall continue this soon. The edge of confession is sharp, and it will cut through the lies." As the suspects dispersed, their faces etched with tension, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "You're closing in, aren't you? But who, Poirot? Beatrice's lie, Lionel's nerves, Charles' grief. It's a tangle." Poirot's eyes sparkled with quiet confidence. "A tangle, oui, but one that unravels with each step. The garden, the key, the poison. They point to a heart consumed by envy. We shall see what Japp's discovery reveals, and then, mon ami, the truth will stand clear." They left the drawing-room, the Hotel Royale's grandeur, a hollow backdrop to the drama unfolding within. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, each clue a note in a symphony nearing its crescendo. Chapter 11. The Little Grey Cells. The late morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the Hotel Royale's private study, a smaller, more intimate room than the grand drawing-room, its walls lined with bookshelves and its air tinged with the faint scent of leather and old paper. Hercule Poirot sat alone at a rosewood desk, his small frame erect, his hands folded neatly before him, his green eyes half closed as if in meditation. The chaos of the morning, the torn veil, the scratched key, the cyanide vial, Beatrice Crane's lie, and the garden's silent witnesses had woven a tapestry of clues, each thread demanding his attention. Captain Hastings had been dispatched to fetch Inspector Japp, whose latest discovery promised to add another piece to the puzzle. For now, Poirot relished the solitude, for it was in such moments that his little grey cells worked their magic, untangling the knots of human motive and deceit. He leaned back, his fingers tracing the polished edge of the desk, his mind replaying the morning's revelations. The bridal suite, locked from within, its key untouched, had presented a facade of impossibility. Yet the scratched spare key in Monsieur Dubois' office suggested a duplicate, a cunning breach of the room's sanctity. The cyanide, swift and merciless, pointed to knowledge, perhaps of photography, casting a shadow over Lionel Grey. The torn veil, ripped with deliberate fury, spoke of a personal vendetta, a heart wounded beyond reason. And the garden encounter, marked by a pearl and a scrap of green silk, hinted at a confrontation that had set the stage for murder. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind's acceleration. "The heart," he murmured to himself, his voice a soft cadence in the quiet room. "It is the heart that drives this crime. Not greed, not ambition, but love turned to poison." He closed his eyes, letting the fragments of evidence align like stars in a constellation. First, Charles Haverford, the grieving groom. His sorrow was palpable, his hands trembling with loss, yet his failure to intervene in Eleanor's garden argument raised questions. Had he truly trusted her to resolve it, or was his inaction a mask for something deeper? His love for Eleanor seemed genuine, but love could conceal guilt as easily as grief. Then, Beatrice Crane, the friend with a shadowed past. Her lie about her whereabouts, claiming to be in her room by 10, while seen near the suite at 11, was a crack in her composure. Her move to the 5th floor, her green silk dress matching the garden's clue, and her old love for Charles painted a picture of envy, perhaps unresolved. Yet her tears, her insistence on friendship, suggested a heart torn between loyalty and longing. Lionel Grey, the nervous cousin, was a puzzle in himself. His vague account of the garden, his knowledge of photographic chemicals, and his reluctance to engage fully with the truth made him a figure of suspicion. Yet his lack of apparent motive, his distant connection to Eleanor, left Poirot wary. Was he a bystander, a witness, or something more? The cyanide vial, with its scratched label, was a tangible link to the crime. Its photographic origin pointed to Lionel, but such chemicals were not exclusive to him. Beatrice, with her proximity to the suite, could have acquired it, perhaps through cunning or theft. Even Charles, with his access to the hotel's inner workings as the groom, might have found a way. The vial's presence under the chaise suggested it was dropped in haste, a mistake by a killer otherwise meticulous. The duplicate key was another cornerstone. The scratch on the spare, kept in Dubois' safe, implied it had been used or copied. Access to the manager's office during the rehearsal dinner, when Dubois was distracted, was possible for any of the suspects. A skilled hand could have made a mold, a duplicate crafted in secret. But who had the opportunity, the nerve? The garden encounter, marked by the pearl and the silk, was the prelude to murder. Eleanor's distress, witnessed by both Charles and Lionel, suggested a confrontation that had stirred deep emotions. The pearl confirmed her presence, the silk pointed to Beatrice, but the second figure remained a shadow. Was it Beatrice, despite her denial, or another unseen by all but Eleanor? Poirot opened his eyes, his gaze falling on a small ormolu clock on the desk, its ticking a reminder of time's relentless march. The timing, he mused. The cyanide acted within an hour, yet the argument was at 10. The murder occurred this morning, between 8:30 and 9:30. The killer, they planned, they waited. His fingers drummed lightly, a rhythm of thought. The veil, torn with such passion. It is the key to the heart. It is not merely a symbol, but a confession, a cry of rage. He stood, pacing the small room with measured steps, his cane a silent partner. "Consider the sequence," he said aloud, as if addressing an invisible audience. "The argument in the garden sets the stage, a spark of jealousy, perhaps, or betrayal. The killer, they brood through the night, their anger growing. They obtain the cyanide. How, we do not yet know. They secure a duplicate key, perhaps during the dinner's chaos. This morning they enter the suite, administer the poison, tear the veil in a final act of defiance, and lock the door, leaving the original key inside. It is a plan both bold and desperate." He paused, his eyes gleaming with sudden clarity. "But why the veil? Why not simply kill and flee? The tear, it is personal, intimate. It is a message to Mademoiselle Langston, to her love, her future. The killer, they could not bear her happiness." A knock at the door broke his reverie, and Hastings entered, followed by Inspector Japp, whose face was flushed with urgency. "Poirot, you've got to hear this," Japp said, brandishing a slip of paper. "The hotel's delivery log shows a package arrived last night, addressed to Miss Crane. A small parcel, signed for at 10:45, just after the dinner. The porter says it was a chemical bottle, though he didn't open it." Poirot's eyes lit up, his posture straightening. "A chemical bottle, you say? Most intriguing. And Mademoiselle Crane, she accepted this herself?" Japp nodded. "The porter's certain. She met him in the lobby, signed for it, and took it upstairs. Fits with Clara's sighting of her near the suite at 11. Hastings gasped, his hands clenching. "Good Lord, Poirot, that's it!" "Beatrice got the cyanide delivered. She's our killer, surely." Poirot's smile was cautious, his mind racing. "Perhaps, mon ami. But we must verify. A bottle delivered does not mean a bottle used. We must confront Mademoiselle Crane with this, and we must learn its contents. Inspector, you will please have the porter confirm the bottle's description and check with local chemists for recent sales of cyanide." Japp scribbled a note, his expression grim. "Right, I'm on it. But this is looking bad for Miss Crane, Poirot. The room change, the lie, now this package. It's piling up." Poirot nodded, his gaze distant. "It piles, oui. But the truth is not yet complete. The little grey cells, they see the shape, but one piece remains missing. The why, the fire that drove this act. Let us summon Mademoiselle Crane once more. Her heart, it holds the final clue." As Japp and Hastings moved to arrange the meeting, Poirot returned to the desk, his fingers brushing the ormolu clock. The study's quiet enveloped him, but within, his mind was a storm of clarity, each clue aligning toward the inevitable unveiling. The Hotel Royal, with its glittering facade, was a stage for a tragedy of love and loss, and Poirot's little grey cells were poised to bring down the curtain. Chapter 12. The Unveiling. The drawing-room of the Hotel Royal, with its gold-flecked walls and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot stood at its centre, his small frame radiating an authority that silenced the murmurs of the assembled company. The fire in the marble hearth cast flickering shadows across the faces of Charles Haverford, Beatrice Crane, and Lionel Gray, each seated in a high-backed chair, their expressions a mixture of dread and anticipation. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his honest face taut with the tension of the moment. Inspector Japp lingered near the door, his notebook in hand, his eyes fixed on Poirot, who had promised to unravel the mystery of Eleanor Langston's murder. The air was thick with expectation, the weight of clues, the torn veil, the cyanide vial, the scratched key, the garden's silk converging toward this final act. "Monsieur, Mesdames," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the room's oppressive silence like a blade through silk. "We stand at the threshold of truth. Mademoiselle Eleanor Langston was murdered in a locked bridal suite, poisoned with cyanide, her veil torn in a gesture of rage. The crime, it appeared impossible. Yet Hercule Poirot has seen that the impossible is merely a challenge to the little grey cells. Let us now unveil the killer." Charles Haverford leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his voice hoarse. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, end this torment. Who took Eleanor from me?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed, his moustache a perfect crescent above lips set in quiet determination. "Patience, Monsieur Haverford. The truth, it is a tapestry woven from many threads. Let us review them. The bridal suite was locked, the key inside, the windows bolted. Yet a duplicate key, suggested by a scratch on the spare in Monsieur Dubois' safe, allowed entry. A vial of cyanide, linked to photography, was found beneath the chaise. A pearl and a scrap of green silk in the garden marked an argument, a prelude to murder. And the torn veil. It speaks of a heart consumed by passion." Beatrice Crane's eyes flashed, her voice sharp. "You keep circling me, Monsieur Poirot. I've told you, I loved Eleanor. I didn't kill her." Poirot turned to her, his gaze unyielding. "Mademoiselle Crane, your words are heartfelt, yet your actions betray you. You lied about your whereabouts, claiming to be in your room by 10. Yet Clara saw you near the suite at 11, holding something, perhaps a key. You moved to the 5th floor, near Mademoiselle Langston, and a package, a chemical bottle, was delivered to you last night. And the silk in the garden, it matches your dress. These are not coincidences." Beatrice stood, her reticule clutched tightly, her face pale. "The package was perfume, not poison. I was near the suite to leave a gift, not to kill. You're twisting everything." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Sit, mademoiselle. We shall see. Let us consider Monsieur Gray." He turned to Lionel, whose spectacles slipped as he flinched. "You, monsieur, saw Mademoiselle Langston arguing in the garden, yet you withheld this until pressed. Your knowledge of photographic chemicals aligns with the cyanide, yet your motive is unclear. Why your silence?" Lionel's hands trembled, his voice thin. "I told you, I didn't want to be involved. I saw Eleanor, yes, but I couldn't see who she argued with. I had no reason to hurt her." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Charles. "And you, Monsieur Haverford, you saw this argument from the terrace, yet you did not act. Your grief is real, but your hands tremble with more than sorrow. Did you know more than you admit?" Charles's eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking. "I loved Eleanor. I saw her distress, but I thought it a minor quarrel. If I'd known, I'd have protected her." Hastings, unable to restrain himself, stepped forward. "Dash it, Poirot. They're all pointing fingers. The key, the poison, the silk. Someone's guilty. But who?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his eyes alight with clarity. "The guilty one, mon ami, is the one whose heart could not bear Mademoiselle Langston's happiness. The murderer is Mademoiselle Beatrice Crane." Beatrice gasped, collapsing back into her chair, her hands covering her face. "No, it's not true. I didn't—" Poirot's voice was relentless, yet tinged with sorrow. "You did, mademoiselle. Let us reconstruct. You loved Monsieur Haverford years ago. but he chose Mademoiselle Langston. That wound festered, did it not? You moved to the 5th floor to be near her, watching, waiting. Last night you argued with her in the garden, a confrontation over Charles, perhaps, where your jealousy flared. A scrap of your green silk dress caught on a thorn, marking your presence. He paced slowly, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. You obtained cyanide, perhaps from a chemist, disguised as a photographic chemical, delivered to you last night. You accessed Monsieur Dubois' office during the dinner when he was distracted and made a mold of the spare key. This morning, between 8:30 and 9:30, you entered the suite with your duplicate poisoned Mademoiselle Langston's water. Her champagne was untouched, but a glass of water stood on the tray. In a final act of rage, you tore her veil, a symbol of the marriage you couldn't endure. You locked the door with the duplicate, leaving the original key inside, and slipped away. Beatrice sobbed, her voice muffled. I couldn't bear it, seeing them together. She had everything, his love, her wealth. I just wanted her gone. Charles cried out, his face ashen. Beatrice, how could you? Eleanor trusted you. Lionel stared, his spectacles fogging with shock. I didn't know. I saw the argument, but I never imagined. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. That's enough, Miss Crane. You'll come with me. Beatrice rose, her shoulders shaking, her confession a broken whisper. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I only wanted her to feel my pain. Poirot watched as Japp led her away, his expression somber. The heart, mon ami, he said to Hastings. It is the most dangerous lock of all. It locks love within, but also envy, and when it breaks, it destroys. Hastings shook his head, his voice low. Brilliant, Poirot. The key, the silk, the veil. You saw it all. Poirot sighed, his eyes distant. I see only what the truth reveals, Hastings. And now we leave this place to mourn, for justice, though served, brings no joy. As they left the drawing-room, the Hotel Royale's grandeur seemed diminished, its halls echoing with the tragedy of a love turned lethal. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, but the cost was a reminder of the fragility of the human heart.